Welcome to the sixth round from our MMA weigh-in studios in downtown Dallas. I'm Navid Razi, joined alongside award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today from the fight capital of the world, Jon "Money" Morgan, in Las Vegas, Nevada, and a huge pay-per-view coming up this Saturday for UFC 162, Jon, featuring a man who is widely considered, and rightfully so in my opinion, the greatest of all time in Anderson the Spider Silva, putting his middleweight title on the line against a young, hungry, undefeated Chris Weidman. And Jon, so many storylines coming into this UFC 162. It's going to be hard to keep this thing under half an hour instead of under 5 minutes like we usually do. But if Anderson Silva wins, we have the prospect of a super fight between either George St. Pierre or Jon "Bones" Jones. If Anderson Silva loses, we could see an immediate rematch against Chris Weidman. So a lot of storylines coming into this UFC 162 event.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's kind of interesting. In the beginning, I don't think people, wondered if Chris Weidman was a legitimate contender and really weren't sure if he deserved to get the title fight. And now that he has, odds makers are pointing him down as one of the best contenders ever to challenge Anderson Silva. The odds are very close on this. I don't think they've been that close since Dan Henderson, actually. So fantastic fight lined up. And like you said, a lot on the line. This thing could go into very different directions.
Anderson Silva is a guy who has 16 UFC victories, tied for second most all-time, highest striking accuracy in the UFC at 67%, 11 wins by knockout, which is the most in UFC history. And by the way, the guy is a lanky 185-pound middleweight, not a 270-pound gorilla heavyweight.
Yeah, I think, Anderson Silva, to me, is the greatest fighter of all time. I know that there is an argument, some people say maybe it's still Fedor Emelianenko. Maybe you could make some other comparisons along the way. But to me, Anderson Silva is the greatest pound-for-pound fighter right now. I know Jon Jones is making quick work with that, with what he's doing. But I think Anderson Silva is the greatest pound-for-pound fighter right now. And I think he's the greatest fighter of all time. And I think he deserves every bit of praise that he gets. And, I do think this is a fantastic matchup for him. I do think this is a challenging matchup. Chris Weidman, a lot of people say he's a little bit better version of Chael Sonnen. I asked Chris about that, and he said, look, I appreciate what they're saying, but I don't even think maybe they're giving me enough credit. I think I've got some different things than Chael Sonnen brings to the table. But, certainly we know that Chris Weidman brings a great wrestling game to the cage. He brings a great jiu-jitsu game to the cage. And what's even more impressive is just the mental strength and fortitude that he has. I mean, Chris Weidman believes that this title is his for the taking. And I think that's, anxious to see. Not that any fighter walks in there thinking they're going to lose, but, Anderson Silva, you can tell he gets in guys' heads and you can see that there's, a little bit of self-doubt as they get in there. And I just don't sense that from Chris Weidman at all.
Yeah, Chris Weidman, I mean, he's obviously no chump. He has 0 losses in his 9 professional MMA bouts. There's no debate to me that Chris Weidman is deserving of this title shot. It's I think he definitely has the upper hand, Jon, when it comes to obviously the wrestling, which we saw Chael Sonnen able to implement against Anderson Silva. But more importantly, Jon, is his jiu-jitsu to me. And it's obviously, I don't think it's on par with Anderson Silva, but it's good enough to not get caught by Anderson Silva with those with the submission, with those long legs and limbs of his. And that's something that Chael Sonnen wasn't able to avoid.
Yeah, that's going to be the big key right there. I don't think anybody's thinking that Chris Weidman is going to go in there and just tap out Anderson Silva with no problem. I think if you look at, the case for a Chris Weidman victory, it is something very similar to Chael Sonnen. Move in. If you have to take a punch or two to get inside, that's what you do. You just push in immediately and get the fight to the ground and spend time on top position. I mean, Chris Weidman is a big middleweight as well. Anderson Silva is a huge middleweight, but so is Chris Weidman. And, to spend time in top position, like you said, avoid, that fifth round submission or, really all rounds, of course, but, avoid that come from behind miracle finish that Anderson Silva produced against Chael Sonnen in the first round. So, if you're making a case for why Chris Weidman wins the fight and how he can do it, I think that's how he does it. He grinds out a decision, maybe a late TKO, if he's able to get enough strikes from top position. But I got to tell you, Navid, I mean, Chris Weidman, like you said, he is deserving. I mean, part of the reason he got to this was that people that were in front of him lost. And you do have to be, honest with that. Michael Bisping, Luke Rockhold, these guys were all tagged to maybe get a shot ahead of him, and they lost. And that's no slight at Chris Weidman. I'm just saying, there were other guys in line ahead of him. So I think Chris Weidman is deserving. Now, you look at his record and you look at who he's fought to get to this title. I don't think there's anybody in the division that matches up with Anderson Silva. So it's not like you can say, oh, well, he fought so-and-so, so he should do fantastic against Anderson Silva. I mean, Anderson's the best ever. He's great there. But, Mark Munoz, Demian Maia, not a knock on either one of those guys, but I don't think they measure up with Anderson Silva. So, I think that's my one concern going into this. Is as strong as it seems mentally that Chris Weidman is, at the end of the day, he hasn't been in there with somebody as good as Anderson Silva, and I'll be interested to see how that plays out.
That's a very good point, John. I don't think, really, when you compare anybody to Anderson Silva, they don't seem like they're on par with Anderson Silva. But there was a funny stat on the UFC.com stat sheet that showed how badly Chris Weidman had outstruck all of his previous UFC opponents, and it kind of made me laugh because that's the last strategy I think you have to implement against Anderson Silva, or you might find your head rolling around on the side of the canvas. But clearly his bread and butter is going to be to take Anderson Silva down, as you mentioned, try to ground and pound, and maybe land one of those big elbows that he caught Mark Munoz with and opened him up with, and TKO Anderson Silva. But honestly, John, it's going to be very difficult for me to see. The one time I picked against Anderson Silva was the very first time he fought Chael Sonnen, and it turned out to be very shocking even for myself. I thought maybe if Chael Sonnen won, it would be a very close decision, just kind of a grind-out thing. Didn't think it would go the way it did, but after that, Anderson Silva got destroyed for 4.5 rounds, actually for 90% of that fight, and kind of threw up something in the last 30 seconds, and he still found a way to win. And after I saw that, I thought the only thing that's going to beat this guy is himself. And by that, I mean if he sticks around too long, a la Chuck Liddell type of situation or anything like that. Other than that, John, I don't see anybody being able to beat this guy, even though Chris Weidman is clearly the best fighter that Anderson Silva has ever faced in the middleweight division.
Yeah, well, maybe not the best fighter, but at least stylistically the right fighter. You know what I mean? I think he has faced some greats like, Dan Henderson and Vitor Belfort is obviously a fantastic fighter as well. But stylistically, I think you're right. It's the right style to beat Anderson Silva. But I agree with you. I mean, again, I do think Anderson Silva is the best ever, and he does find a way to win fights. I mean, you talk about the original Chael Sonnen matchup, the first bout, and of course there was the rib injury that was documented in like water. That was certainly a factor. There was some, tinfoil hat wearing folks that say he willingly went to his back because he wanted to submit Chael Sonnen as kind of to make up for the insults to the Nogueira brothers and all those things. I don't know if I buy that, but
they've seen too many Steven Seagal movies.
Exactly. But I was in the building that night, and I will say that was an incredible comeback. But that was the thing. First of all, it was really the first time he's ever really been tested in the UFC. And secondly, he still found a way to win the fight. Yeah. And that's what's incredible about it. The guy finds a way to win, and that's why I'm picking Anderson Silva. When a guy is 16-0, I know it's fashionable to pick Chris Weidman right now. It seems like a lot of people are riding that underdog train. And you know what? Honestly, if I had to put some money down on it, I might put a little money on Chris Weidman just because I know I can get some value, and I wouldn't be shocked if Chris Weidman found a way to win it because of his stylistic strengths. But that said, I just think Anderson Silva constantly finds a way to win fights. You make one mistake, and he capitalizes on it immediately like no other. Again, hey, he is 38 years old. As Dana White has warned us in the past, there is going to be a time when Anderson shows up and looks his age. But I just don't see it yet. I don't see it yet. I mean, we're talking about Stephan Bonner back in October, but he toyed with Stephan Bonner. I mean, that was no offense to Stephan Bonner, but that was just ridiculous. It was just a one-sided. It was a man playing with a boy in there, and that's amazing to say. Somebody that was moving up in weight to light heavyweight. So anyway, all that said, I think Anderson Silva is the right pick here. I think he's going to get this fight. I think he will get a TKO finish. I could see it going all 5 rounds, but I think he will get a TKO finish at some point. The speed that he brings, the elusiveness, and of course the devastating striking. I think it's just going to be a little bit too much for Chris Weidman right now, and opens up the door for a super fight. Whether or not he wants it or not depends on who you ask. Anderson likes to mess with us. Yeah. He likes to pretend he doesn't care too much. He said on this week's UFC Tonight that he really doesn't have any plans. He doesn't care, but you know what? I'd love to see it if it can happen. I'd love to see him face George St. Pierre and Jon Jones. If I have to pick one or the other, I want the Jon Jones fight. Course. But I'd love to see them both happen, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you brought up as far as his age, John, because we've witnessed Anderson Silva make our eyes lie to us when he puts his hands down and puts his hands to the side, stands right in front of another professional UFC middleweight contender, and he fools with those guys and just bobs and weaves and then kicks their face off or throws some kind of insane. I mean, it's unbelievable to watch, and I think we're very fortunate to be watching at the time that we are. But as you mentioned, this guy is less than 2 years shy of 40 years old, and somehow he has managed to not only make our eyes lie to us in his fighting style, but he's been able to defy the laws of Father Time, and we have not seen him lose a step. And what's crazy about that, John, is he's a middleweight. It's one thing if you're a heavyweight and you lose some speed, reaction time. It's not as noticeable because those guys are packing a lot of power. Cain Velasquez, guys like that are starting to change the trend in heavyweights a little bit, but for the most part, if you lose a little speed when you're heavier, it's not as noticeable. This guy's a middleweight, a lanky, skinny middleweight at that, who depends on speed, accuracy, and reaction time, and I have not seen him lose an ounce of that.
He's a freak of nature, man. I mean, just the head movement that he shows, the comfortableness that he has in the pocket. You know, I was talking to Chris Weidman. He brought in Stephen Wonderboy Thompson to train with him in his training camp. He said, "Yeah, I know. Look, you know, it's a smaller guy, obviously, than Anderson is, but for one thing is he's able to do those creative moves that Anderson does, and he's so comfortable in there. I mean, you mentioned Anderson putting his hands down. The guy is unbelievably comfortable in the pocket. I mean, he's just not. He sees everything. It's honestly, like he comes in and he just studies you. He's kind of a slow starter because he comes out and he just studies you and kind of watches the movement and gets your rhythm down, your timing down, and then unleashes once he's got it all studied. It's fun to watch, man. We've had Anderson Silva around for so long that he's just become, a staple of our UFC entertainment. A lot of people have said, "Oh, the middleweight division's not that good because Anderson Silva has smoked everybody." I always call that the Tiger Woods syndrome. It's like when Tiger Woods was running through everybody. Everybody said, "Well, there's nobody to challenge him." I bet Phil Mickelson's a pretty damn good golfer.
Yeah.
Same thing. I think Anderson Silva has just made the middleweight division look worse than it is because he's that good. It's going to go away. It's going to go away at some point. I think we got to enjoy it. I know that when the lights go down and the DMX comes on Saturday night, I'll be trying to soak it in a little bit because again, I just think Anderson Silva is the greatest we've ever seen. I think we need to enjoy it. Chris Weidman not taking anything away from him. I will say, if Chris Weidman finds a way to win this fight and has his hand raised, I will not be shocked. I think stylistically he brings all the things to the table that we say it takes to beat Anderson Silva, but I just don't know if you can beat Anderson Silva.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations, John, where it puzzles me when I hear people, and this happens in every sport. Once a big dog is on top, it's almost like everybody kind of rushes to see how quick somebody else can knock them off. And I've never understood that in any other sport, especially in MMA and the UFC. But this is good for the sport, John. Even if it does make the middleweight division look bad, every sport needs that one fighter. Every sport needs that one athlete who is considered the greatest of all time. You look at Michael Jordan compared to LeBron James. Statistically speaking, LeBron James' statistics are better than Michael Jordan's in a lot of categories. However, I don't think he'll ever overtake Michael Jordan in that debate of the greatest of all time. And I think Anderson Silva and Jon Jones will be looked at similarly in history. Jon Jones, I mean, he's going through and killing people, but he's not making your jaw drop the whole time like Anderson Silva is doing. And I think Anderson Silva lends a lot of legitimacy to the UFC and to MMA in general, and being that staple and the greatest of all time. I don't understand why people are knocking it. I'm with you. I think people should jump on that train and enjoy it while it's there because, as we mentioned, 38, less than 2 years from being 40, you got to think that it's going to start to fade away soon.
You do, and I hate to say it, that's why I'd like to see the Jon Jones fight happen sooner rather than later, assuming that he gets by Chris Weidman at UFC 162. I'd like to see it happen because, two things. Number one, then as far as I'm concerned, Jon Jones could rattle off 50 wins in a row, and Anderson Silva still gets to claim that he's the best ever because you know what? He beat Jon Jones, and not only would he have beaten Jon Jones, but he'd have done it when Jon is. You could say maybe he's not technically in his athletic prime yet, but come on, Jon Jones is in the middle of a nice title run right now, and Anderson Silva's doing it in the twilight of his career. So, if he was able to somehow find a way to beat Jon Jones, and then again, let's not even mention if he was able to find a way to beat George St. Pierre also, man, that would be just amazing. I don't think you could take anything away from him. So, I'm excited. I do think this is a competitive matchup. I know it sounds like we're spending a lot of time talking about what lies in the future, but, I mean, there's only a handful of guys that are this meaningful in the sport. I
Yeah.
mean, this guy is one of the biggest superstars. So it's fun to look ahead. It's fun to talk about what's next. But, if Anderson's thinking about what's next, it could be a rough night for him. I just think he's too professional to let that happen.
Yeah, he's been doing it too long. It's going to be an absolute treat to watch either way. Cannot wait for UFC 162 taking place on pay-per-view this Saturday. You do not want to miss this fight. For Navid, Razi in downtown Dallas, Jon Morgan in Las Vegas. We'll catch you next week.